Good evening, and welcome to the Higher Ground Calvary Chapel School of Ministry. This is our second class dealing with the damned deceptions, and we're going to be talking about the cults. Specifically tonight, we're going to be examining the contract. We've mentioned before how that the Bible is a legally binding contract between God and mankind. And so tonight we're going to look at the other contracts. We're going to have the Book of Mormon, which is another testament of Jesus Christ. And we're going to be looking at the New World Translation. These are the contracts that the cults have put out. Remember last week we were talking about Isaiah 28, verse 15 and verse 18, and how the fact was that when God mentioned that he was going to send a scourge, meaning the army of Babylon, to judge the children of Israel, their response to Isaiah was, "Oh, we have made a contract with death, and with hell we are in agreement." And so consider these: the contract with death, and this one is the agreement with hell. And God responded to that statement and said, basically, your contract is disannulled and your agreement will not stand, and when the judgment comes, you're going to be trodden down. So, tonight we're going to be talking about the contract. As some background to this, I had training for about 40 years in claims handling. And as an insurance claims adjuster, the first thing that I had to do was to pull the contract. When somebody filed a claim, when somebody was injured, when they had an auto accident, when something was stolen, the first thing that we had to do was to go to the policy. Now, for those who've never seen policies, this is the one for workers' compensation, and it has different sections. And in this section, they have when things are covered, where they are covered, what things are not covered, what makes them covered, what makes them not covered. And so as the claims adjuster, I had to read these every time there was a claim and make a determination as to whether or not this fell under the contract and whether or not it was going to be covered. So there's several basic rules that come from contract law, and I want to kind of touch on these before we get into the actual topic tonight. Okay, since the Bible is God's contract and it's going to be dealing with the plan of salvation, these rules that deal with contract law are going to also apply to God's contract. Now, the first rule is very simple. If it ain't in the contract, it does not apply. And people say, oh, well, I told my agent to put this in there. And I would have to look through the contract. And if it wasn't in the contract, it wasn't part of the insurance policy, it's not covered. And a lot of people would end up having to go back against their agent and file a lawsuit against their agent for errors and omission. But the rule of law, if it's not in the contract, it does not apply. So this is why we've been trained how to read the contracts before we proceed with any other part of the case. The second rule is that any changes to the contract have to be in writing, and they have to be signed off by all the parties involved in the contract. So this is how you have documentation that a change has been made to the policy. So the insurance company cannot just arbitrarily change the policy. If they arbitrarily change the policy, they are required to contact all of their insureds and say, hey, we just changed the policy. And if their insureds, if their clients decide that they are in agreement with that change, then they stay with the policy. If they don't like what the changes are, then they can cancel the policy and go somewhere else. Now, along the same idea, it's also true with the client. So a person who purchases the insurance policy cannot arbitrarily change the insurance policy. So let me just pick up the New World Translation. This is exactly what the Jehovah's Witnesses did. Now, I'm not going to do a lot of detail on the New World Translation tonight because, to be honest, it's not really a translation. Now, I know there's going to be people sending emails. They're going to get angry about this. According to Wikipedia, that in 1950, the New World Translations was issued. They started working on it in about 1946. They claimed that they had an anonymous council of competent translators working on this. Now, Wikipedia identified these anonymous translators. And you got to give them credit. They said, oh no, don't use our names. Don't let anybody know who we are. We're too modest. We want to give God all the glory. Well, that's fine. But when the information came out on Wikipedia, out of the entire council doing the translation, only one person had ever been to college. And that person did not graduate. He dropped out before he ever earned any college degree. But he claimed to be fluent in about 7 to 10 different languages. And so they're claiming that he's the one that guided this whole thing all the way through. And they will mention a whole bunch of different manuscripts that they were accessing. They were using manuscripts other than the manuscripts used by the King James Bible. Now that's amazing, because this was written way back when, in the time of Shakespeare. This one was written in 1950. But if you read it, it sounds almost identical to the King James English version. And if you're using different manuscripts, you're not going to have it word for word. There's going to be changes in there, subtle changes. So from all indications, and my personal theory, so take it for what it's worth, is that I don't believe this was an actual translation. I think this is something that they took the King James Bible and they started changing what it said to fit what they believed. So, if you're the person who purchased the insurance policy, New World Translations, you just can't go in and change what the policy says without the insurance company's permission. Now, the third rule deals with ambiguity. Now, this is a wonderful rule. In this rule, if you have a contract, and that contract is not clear, oh, you didn't read the fine print, or they used a word that might have more than one meaning,